I never thought I would be alone in my old age. Irma and I planned to grow old together, sitting on the porch of our house in Chula Vista and watching our grandchildren play on the lawn. How often life laughs at our plans. 4 years have passed since I buried my wife, and the feeling of emptiness in the house has not gone away. Today is Wednesday, the day I visit her grave, an unchanging ritual that I honor, regardless of the weather or how I feel. I adjusted my tie, looking at my reflection in the hallway mirror. 68 years old, and I still can't give up the habit of dressing appropriately, even if I'm just going to the cemetery. Some might call it old-fashioned, I call it self-respect. You're turning into an old grouch, Eugene, I muttered to myself, running my hand through my gray hair. 20 minutes later, I stood at the simple but elegant headstone. Irma had never been one for excess. Noel hasn't called again, I said quietly, setting the fresh flowers down on the cold stone. It's been 3 weeks now. I tried to call him on Monday, but he was too busy. It must be Valerie's influence. The wind rustled the leaves of the nearby trees, as if Irma was sighing as she listened to me complain. She always said I was too hard on our only son, that I expected too much from him. I just wanted him to make something worthwhile out of his life, I continued my monologue. Is it such a crime to expect your child to aspire to something more than delivering packages? I remembered the day Noel announced he was dropping out of college to work as a courier. I want real money, not promises of a future, he said then. I took it as a personal insult. For 40 years I had worked as a tax consultant, earning enough to provide a comfortable life for my family, to put aside for my old age and college for my son. And this is how he repaid my efforts. You know, sometimes I think we spoiled him too much, I sighed. Maybe if he knew the value of money, Irma, if she were here, would have objected. He's just different, Eugene. Not everyone has to follow your path. Maybe she was right. But when I see Noel slogging away at a job that anyone with minimal education could do, I'm frustrated. After spending almost an hour at the grave, I headed to the car. My old Buick, reliable as a Swiss watch, was waiting in the cemetery parking lot. Noel had always teased me about my affection for this antiquity, as he called it, suggesting I buy something modern. But I valued reliability and history over fancy new gadgets. As I sat behind the wheel, I let myself sink into my memories. How quickly things had changed since Noel had married Valerie 5 years ago. A fitness center girl, 10 years younger than my son, with ambitions clearly beyond her abilities. From the beginning, there was animosity between us. She saw me as an old-fashioned snob. I saw her as a calculating person who saw Noel as a means to an end. You don't even try to understand her, my son reproached me after one particularly tense family dinner. What's there to understand, I countered. She's manipulating you and you don't even notice. After that, our relationship became strained, our meetings infrequent, and our conversations brief and formal. Noel stopped dropping by, appearing only on special occasions, and then only with apparent reluctance. I pulled out of the cemetery and onto the main road, heading home. The California sun was shining brightly, but it was overcast. Sometimes I wondered if I was to blame for our estrangement. Maybe I really had been too demanding a father. Maybe I should have been more supportive and less critical. These thoughts distracted me, and I didn't immediately notice the pickup truck speeding out of the intersection from around the corner. I only had time to twist the steering wheel, trying to avoid a collision, but it was too late. A squeal of brakes, a bang, the sound of shattered glass, and the world spun into a kaleidoscope of light and shadow. The next thing I knew, sirens, hands gently pulling me out of the mangled Buick, the concerned voices of the paramedics. Pain pulsed through every cell in my body, but the scariest thought was, who's going to tell Noel? Will he even show up? In the ambulance, the paramedic asked who to call. In pain, I dictated my son's number. The young man dialed the number, and I heard the answering machine go on. Noel didn't pick up. Leave a message, I wheezed. Tell them I've been in an accident and they're taking me to Chula Vista Memorial Hospital. All the way to the hospital, I balanced on the edge of consciousness, thinking about how ironic the situation was. All my life, I've been a model citizen, paying my taxes, helping my neighbors, supporting my family. And now I'm lying alone in an ambulance, and the only loved one I have left isn't even answering the phone. The first 24 hours in the hospital were like a blur. The diagnosis was disappointing. Multiple rib fractures, compound fracture of my right leg, concussion, and internal contusions. The doctors assured me that I was lucky. I could have died in such a collision. Lucky. That's a strange definition for a 68-year-old widower confined to a hospital bed. Noel didn't show up until the next day, excited and a little guilty. He stood in the doorway of the room, hesitant to enter, as if waiting for an invitation. "Hi, Dad," he said at last. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck," I replied, trying to make a joke, but it came out bitter. "Technically, it was a pickup truck." Noel smiled awkwardly. He moved closer so I could get a better look at him. 35 years old and looking tired. His blonde hair, once thick, was starting to thin at the top of his head, a little early for his age. His eyes were a mixture of worry and something akin to guilt. "I'm sorry I didn't come right away," he said. "Valerie and I were on the other side of town, looking at houses. Didn't get the message until late last night." "Looking at houses?" I asked, feeling suddenly anxious. "Why?" Noel faltered, shifting from foot to foot. "We're thinking about moving. Valerie thinks it's time we got something more spacious. You know, for the future." For the future could only mean one thing. "Is Valerie pregnant?" I asked her directly. "No, no," Noel answered quickly. "Just, planning ahead." I chuckled. Knowing Valerie, planning ahead meant status and glamour, not practical necessity. "And how are you going to pay for something more spacious on a courier's salary?" I couldn't resist a barb. Noel's face tensed, a familiar reaction to my criticism. He'd snapped at me before, but now he just shut down. "I got a promotion," he said dryly. "I'm route coordinator now." "Congratulations," I replied, sincerely trying to sound non-sarcastic. "Good for you." An awkward silence hung in the room. We both felt ourselves slipping easily into a familiar rut of mutual misunderstanding. "Valerie didn't come?" I asked, knowing the answer in advance. "She had a shift at the fitness center and couldn't get away," Noel answered mechanically. "She sends her best wishes." I doubted the sincerity of those best wishes, but I decided not to comment. We talked some more about the weather, about my treatment, about my rehabilitation plans, all topics that avoided real conversation. When Noel finally got ready to leave, I asked the question that had been bothering me since the accident. "The doctors say I'll be here for at least 2 weeks, then more rehab. Could you keep an eye on the house? Pick up the mail, water the plants. Irma would be upset if her hydrangeas died." Noel nodded, clearly relieved that he could do something concrete and useful. "Of course, Dad. Don't worry, I'll take care of everything." I handed him a bunch of spare keys that the nurse had pulled out of the bag of my personal belongings. Our fingers touched, and for a moment I felt a surge of hope. Maybe this situation would help us break down the barriers that had grown between us over the years. "Thank you, son," I said. And for the first time in a long time, there wasn't an ounce of irony in that address. Noel nodded awkwardly and left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my pain, both physical and mental. I looked out the window at the bright California sky and thought about how strangely life works. All my career I've spent helping people sort through confusing tax returns, find loopholes, and optimize expenses. I prided myself on my ability to see order in the chaos of numbers, to pick up patterns and predict trends. But in the most important area of all, my relationship with my own son, I seem to have failed utterly. Maybe I was too hard on him. Maybe my expectations were unrealistic. I had always wanted Noel to follow in my footsteps or choose another respectable profession: doctor, lawyer, engineer. I couldn't understand how a man with his potential could settle for a job that required no education or special skills. But deep down, I realized that it wasn't just his career choice. Something more fundamental was separating us. Different values, different understandings of what was important in life. Noel had always sought immediate gratification, the easy way out. I believed in discipline, planning, and hard work. The nurse came into the room to check my vitals and give me pain medication. I caught myself thinking that I found her easier to talk to than my own son. "You need to rest, Mr. Quincy," she said as she adjusted the IV. Try not to worry. Focus on getting better. I nodded, closing my eyes. It's easy to say not to worry, especially when you feel something important slipping between your fingers and you don't know how to hold on to it. Sleep came unexpectedly quickly, carrying me away from painful reality into merciful darkness. The hospital days stretched slowly, as if time had decided to take a break. I was accustomed to an active life. Even after retirement, I didn't allow myself to languish at home. Daily walks in the neighborhood, reading financial magazines at the corner cafe, chess sessions with other retirees in the city park. My routine was clear and full. Now I was bedridden, and the only entertainment was watching the nurses change bandages and IVs. "How are we feeling today, Mr. Quincy?" Emily, the young nurse, asked cheerfully as she entered the room. "Oh, we feel like we've been run over by a truck," I replied, emphasizing that we. "And how do you feel, Miss Emily?" She smiled, having gotten used to my grumbling. "I assume that means the pain is moderate?" She deftly checked my vitals. "Dr. Parker says you're improving faster than expected." At my age, faster than expected still means agonizingly slow. I sighed, but without much bitterness. Emily was one of the few nurses I liked. She didn't fuss, didn't look pitying, just did her job and occasionally kept the conversation going, sensing when I was in the mood for it. "Did your son come in yesterday?" she asked, changing the IV. "No." I tried to keep my voice neutral. "He has a job, a family. Busy man." "Of course," she nodded, but I could see the shadow of disapproval in her eyes. Nurses are quick to realize which patients are lonely, even if they don't complain. When Emily left, I tried to concentrate on the book Dr. Parker had brought me, some contemporary novel he thought was gripping. But my thoughts kept returning to Noel. I remembered him as a little boy, an inquisitive boy with bright eyes who followed me around, inundating me with questions. Why is the sky blue? How does the television work? Where does the sun go at night? In those days, I was a hero, able to answer any question, solve any problem. When exactly did I go from hero to burden in his eyes? It probably started when I was a teenager. I expected him to have the discipline and responsibility I'd absorbed in military school. But Noel was different. Dreamy, a little distracted, preferring computer games to household chores. "You're raising a wimp, not a man," my father said to me one day when he saw me doing Noel's math homework for him. His words struck a chord with me. The next day, I made Noel join a wrestling class to learn to stand up for himself. He hated every minute of training, but he lasted almost a year before I gave up and let him go. And then there was college, the first real crack in our relationship. I insisted on an economics major at a prestigious university, even though Noel gravitated toward art and wanted to study photography. "That's not a real profession," I declared at the time. "Get a solid major first, and then photograph as much as you want as a hobby." He enrolled as I wanted him to, but only lasted 2 semesters. Then there was that memorable conversation. "I'm leaving the university," he said at dinner, looking down at his plate. "What do you mean, I'm leaving?" I put my fork down. "In the middle of the school year? I've been offered a job with a courier service. Good pay, growth prospects." "Growth prospects?" I couldn't contain my laughter. "As a senior courier?" His face petrified, and his eyes, so similar to Irma's, filled with resentment. "At least I'll be earning my own money instead of spending yours on an education I don't need." Irma intervened then, trying to smooth things over, but it was too late. Something important had broken between us that night. I sighed, coming back to the reality of the hospital room. Maybe I really had been too harsh. Maybe I should have listened more to his desires instead of imposing my vision of success. My musings were interrupted by the sound of an incoming message on my phone. I reached for the nightstand, wincing at the pain in my ribs. The screen showed a new message from Noel. Unusual, he usually preferred to call or not commiserate at all. I opened the message and felt the blood rush from my face. "Your house is sold. Bye." I reread those 4 words over and over again, unable to believe my eyes. This had to be some kind of mistake, a cruel joke, or maybe Noel had sent this message to the wrong person. With trembling fingers, I dialed his number. The beeps, long, annoying. Dropped it. Tried again. Same thing. My house. The place where Irma and I lived for 30 years. Where we raised our son. Where we kept all our memories, photos, letters. where the hydrangeas she loved so much grew in the garden. Sold? How was that possible? I didn't sign any documents. I didn't give my consent. It's absurd, absurd. But deep down, I began to realize what had happened. Power of attorney. 3 years ago, after Irma's death, when I'd had a minor heart attack, I'd executed a power of attorney for Noel. In case I couldn't make decisions, I explained to the notary. It was an act of trust, a sign that despite our differences, I trusted my son to do the right thing if something happened to me. And that's how he used that trust. I felt a heaviness building in my chest, and it had nothing to do with broken ribs. The pain was deeper, more piercing. Betrayal. That's what it was called. Nurse Emily returned to the room and immediately noticed the change in my condition. "Mr. Quincy, are you feeling ill?" She quickly approached the bed, checking my pulse. "Your heart rate is rapid. Do you feel pain in your chest?" I shook my head, unable to explain that it wasn't physical pain that was bothering me. "It's just bad news," I said, pointing to my phone. She delicately didn't ask, but insisted on calling the doctor. He arrived a few minutes later, checked my vitals, and prescribed a mild sedative. "You need to avoid stress, Mr. Quincy," he said seriously. "In your condition, strong emotional disturbances can be dangerous." I nodded, not listening. My thoughts were racing frantically, trying to find an explanation that would be less painful than the truth. Maybe Noel was in some kind of trouble. Maybe he needed money and saw no other way out. But then why not discuss it with me? Why go behind my back and then announce a fait accompli in such a frivolous way? Bye, as if it were a trifle, and not the house where my whole life was kept. I remembered my last conversation with Noel when he mentioned that he and Valerie had been looking at houses. It was clear now that they weren't looking for a house for themselves. They were looking for a buyer for my house. And the whole time I was in the hospital, they were preparing this deal. Toward evening, as the effects of the sedative began to wear off, I made another attempt to contact my son. This time he answered almost immediately, as if he had been expecting a call. Dad. There was a strange mixture of guilt and determination in his voice. "What do you mean the house is sold?" I tried to speak calmly, but my voice treacherously shook. Silence on the other end of the line, then a deep sigh. "Valerie and I thought you didn't need such a big house anymore. After the accident, you'll need special care, perhaps a special facility." A special facility? I couldn't believe my ears. "Nationalidum. You're putting me in a nursing home?" "No, not right away," he answered hastily. "But in the long run, the doctor said that your rehabilitation would take many months, and such a home requires constant care, maintenance costs. Is that why you decided to sell it while I was in the hospital, without even discussing it with me?" "I tried to talk to you," he sounded defensive, "but you're always so critical of all my ideas. We knew you'd be against it, but this decision is for your own good." "For my own good," I echoed, feeling the cold rage building inside me. "And where did the money from the sale go?" There was silence again, longer and more tense. "Valerie took care of it," he said finally. "Most of it will go to pay for your treatment and future care. And the smaller part? Well, you see, Valerie has long dreamed of traveling after all the stress of your accident, selling your house. We thought we deserved a little vacation." I closed my eyes, trying to deal with a wave of anger and frustration. "Where exactly are you going?" "Hawaii." His voice got quieter, as if he was beginning to realize how that sounded. "Just for 2 weeks. We'll be back before you get out of the hospital." How generous of you, I couldn't help but be sarcastic. "So you sold my house, took the money, and now you're flying to Hawaii while I lie here with broken bones. That's your definition of filial concern? Dad, you've got it all wrong." "No, Noel, I'm getting it perfectly right." My voice turned icy. "For the first time in a long time, I'm seeing things clearly. Enjoy your vacation." I dropped the call without waiting for him to answer. My hands were shaking, and my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my newly healed ribs. Nurse Emily must have seen my condition on the monitors, because she appeared in the room almost immediately. "Mr. Quincy," her voice was worried, "your blood pressure is spiking. You shouldn't be so worried." "How am I supposed to react," I asked, "when I find out that my own son sold my house while I was lying here helpless?" Her face expressed genuine sympathy, which only added to my pain. I didn't need pity. I needed answers and justice. He had no right, I continued, talking more to myself than to her. Even with power of attorney, it must be illegal. I'm not a lawyer, Emily replied cautiously, checking the IV, but my brother works in real estate. If you'd like, I could ask him. I nodded, grateful for this small act of kindness in the midst of all the chaos. Please. I was a tax consultant, not a real estate expert. I don't know all the legal intricacies. I'll ask him today, she promised. In the meantime, try to get some rest. You need to recuperate. When Emily left, I was alone with my thoughts. How did we get to this point? When my relationship with my son had turned into a cold war, with everyone looking out for their own interests? I remembered teaching Noel how to ride a bike. He was 6 years old, afraid of falling, but I insisted he had to learn. Real men aren't afraid to fall, I said, holding the bike by the seat. Then I let go without warning him. He rode a few meters on his own, turned around with an enthusiastic smile, and immediately fell, skinning his knees and elbows. Instead of consoling him, I stood over him and said, "See? You made it. Now get up and try again." He didn't cry. He knew I wouldn't approve. He just silently stood up, wiped his dirty palms on his shorts, and got back on his bike. At the time, I thought I was teaching him resilience and courage. Now I wondered if I taught him instead to hide his true feelings and act underhanded. Maybe selling the house wasn't just a way for him to get money. Maybe it was an act of revenge, a way to finally prove his independence from a father who never thought he was good enough. I took a deep breath, feeling the fatigue and emotional exhaustion take over. All my life, I had prided myself on my ability to control a situation, to plan ahead, to foresee consequences. And now here I lay, utterly helpless, while my son and his wife managed the fruits of my life. What would Irma say? She had always been the voice of reason and compassion in our family. She would have reminded me that Noel is our son no matter what. She would have found a way to resolve the conflict without completely destroying the family. But Irma hadn't been around for 4 years, and every day I felt her absence more acutely. I closed my eyes trying to picture her face, to hear her voice. "Don't judge him too harshly, Eugene," she would say. "Remember yourself when you were his age. You made mistakes too. But this wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal, a conscious decision to take advantage of my vulnerability. And I didn't know if I could ever forgive it." With these heavy thoughts, I fell into a restless sleep, where I saw our house again and again, but I couldn't enter it, as if I were already a ghost, a disembodied observer of my past life. The next few days passed in a strange daze. I followed all the doctor's instructions, took my medications, underwent procedures, but my thoughts were far away. In front of my eyes was our house, light blue with white shutters and veranda, where Irma and I liked to sit in the warm evenings, watching the sunset. A house where every corner held memories of years gone by. "You're very quiet today, Mr. Quincy," Emily remarked during her morning rounds. "Has the pain gotten worse?" I shook my head. No, it wasn't the physical pain. She crouched on the edge of the bed, a gesture beyond the normal duties of a nurse. "I talked to my brother about your situation. He said it depends on the wording of the power of attorney. If it was worded correctly, with restrictions on such transactions, you have a chance of contesting the sale." "Sonny, thank you." I thanked him sincerely. I don't remember the exact wording, but it didn't seem to explicitly authorize the sale of the property. The power of attorney was for managing accounts and making medical decisions if I became incapacitated. Emily nodded. "Then you should consult a lawyer. My brother recommended the law clinic at City College. They often take on elderly cases for free or for a minimal fee." "I can afford a good lawyer," I objected. But then I remembered that my major accounts were now probably locked up. At least they could have been before Noel had access to my finances. Emily squeezed my hand understandingly. "You don't have any other relatives who might be able to help?" I shook my head negatively. Irma was an only child, her parents long dead. My brother Robert lived in Florida and needed care himself due to advanced dementia. "Just friends, but I don't want to drag them into this unpleasant story." "Sometimes we need to let others help," Emily said softly. "It's not weakness, but wisdom." Her words made me think. All my life I'd prided myself on my independence. on solving my own problems. But now the situation demanded a different approach. Perhaps you're right, I admitted reluctantly. There is one person who might be able to help. Perkins Holt, an old friend and colleague of mine. We worked together in the IRS before we started our own consulting firm. Would you like me to give him a call? Emily suggested it. No, I'll do it myself. I picked up the phone. But thanks for the offer and for the information from your brother. She smiled and left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts on the phone. I found Perkins' number in my contacts and pressed call, hoping he hadn't changed the number in the 2 years we hadn't spoken. Eugene? His voice, husky from age and years of cigar habit, sounded surprised. Haven't heard from you in a while. Something wrong? You could say that, I grinned wryly. I'm in the hospital, Perk. I was in a car accident a week ago. God damn it, he exclaimed. Really? Why didn't you call sooner? Didn't want to bother you. You know me. I paused. But I need help now. Noel, my son, he sold my house while I was lying here. There was a heavy pause. Say that again, Perkins finally said, the steel in his voice that I remembered from our work together. He did what? I told him the whole situation, the power of attorney, the message, the call to Noel. Perkins' voice grew harder with each word. I'll be there today, he said when I was done. Dash Memorial Hospital in Chula Vista, right? And I'm bringing my lawyer. Carol specializes in this kind of thing. Ew, now, Perk, I can't ask you. You're not asking, I'm offering, he interrupted me. And don't argue with me, Eugene. We've known each other for 40 years. If the situation were reversed, you'd do the same for me. He was right, and we both knew it. I thanked him and passed out, feeling a strange mixture of relief and shame. Relief at not being completely alone in this situation, and shame at having to ask for help. Perkins kept his word and showed up in my room toward evening, accompanied by an elegant woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes and a business acumen that could be felt even through her demure smile. Carol Mayfield, she introduced herself, shaking my hand. Dash, Mr. Holt told me about your situation. It's outrageous, and I'm sure we can challenge the deal. We need to work out the details first, Perkins said, settling into the visitor's chair. He looked much the same as he had the last time we'd seen him, tall, with a lock of gray hair and piercing blue eyes. Only the wrinkles were deeper, and his back was a little hunched. Who bought the house? When was the transaction made? What documents were signed? I shook my head. All I know is that Noel used a power of attorney I'd executed 3 years ago. The transaction apparently happened very quickly. I've only been in the hospital for a week and a half. Carol opened her laptop. I can check with the real estate registry. What's your exact address? I dictated the address of the house and she quickly tapped the keys. Here it is, she said after a few minutes. The deed was registered 4 days ago. Buyers are a Turner couple. The seller is Noel Quincy, acting under a power of attorney. The price, she raised her eyebrows, $425,000. What? I couldn't believe my ears. The house is worth at least $600,000. Exactly, Carol made a note in her notebook. That's the first sign of a bad deal. Underpricing, especially when acting under a power of attorney, is always suspicious. Perkins frowned. Does Noel know anything about real estate? No, I answered. He works as a courier, more specifically a route coordinator for a courier service. Then he either didn't know the real value of the house or, I said. Perkins was silent, not wanting to state the obvious. Or he'd intentionally sold it cheaper to make it go faster. I finished for him. Carol continued to study the documents on the screen. It says here that part of the money, $150,000, was transferred to the account of dash. She checked the records. Noel and Valerie Quincy's joint account. The rest of the money was supposed to go into your personal account, Mr. Quincy. I reached for the phone. I'd have to check. Using the bank's mobile app, I logged into my account. The most recent transaction was the receipt of $275,000 3 days ago. The money did arrive, I confirmed. But that doesn't change the fact that the transaction was done without my consent and at an undervalued price. And that most of the money is in their account, Perkins added. Carol, what are our prospects? The lawyer tapped her pen thoughtfully on her notebook. We need to get a copy of the power of attorney and check the wording. If it doesn't expressly authorize the sale of the property, we have a strong position. We'll also need to prove that Noel wasn't acting in your best interest, Mr. Quincy. The fact that he took a significant portion of the money for himself and his "your house is sold" buy message speak in our favor. What about the buyers? I asked. It wasn't their fault. That's a difficult question, Carol admitted. If they didn't know about the irregularities in the sale, they are considered bona fide purchasers, but given the underpricing, it's conceivable that they might have been aware of some problems. Either way, if the court invalidates the deal, they'll have to return the house, and you'll have to pay back the money you received. I nodded, mentally going over my options. Could I return the money if some of it had already been spent by Noel and Valerie? Did I want to return to a house that would now be associated with my son's betrayal? What about motive? Perkins asked. Why would Noel want to sell his father's house in such a hurry? I remembered our conversation. He and his wife had flown to Hawaii. Valerie had been dreaming of that cruise for a long time. With the money from the sale of your house? Perkins shook his head. This isn't just dishonest use of power of attorney anymore. It's Perk, I said warningly. Whatever Noel did, he's still my son. My old friend sighed but didn't continue. Carol tactfully turned the conversation to practical matters. Mr. Quincy, we need to move quickly. I'll prepare a preliminary lawsuit to invalidate the deal and file an application for interim measures to prevent the Turners from reselling the house. We'll also need to contact the bank and possibly freeze some of the funds in your son's account so they can't spend all the money. I don't want them to end up on the street, I said, feeling anger and parental concern warring inside me. They won't end up on the street, Carol assured me. It's only about the money from the sale of your house. I'm sure they have their own place. They're renting an apartment, I remembered. Noel had always thought that buying real estate was too much responsibility and restriction of freedom. Ironic, isn't it? Perkins hummed. Ironic enough. But don't worry, Eugene. We'll make it up to you. After they left, I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how Noel and I had gotten to this point. What had I done wrong? At what point had my son decided that betraying his father was an acceptable choice? But those were fruitless musings. What was important now was action. I picked up my phone and texted Noel, "We need to talk. Call me when you can." There was no reply. He and Valerie were probably already in Hawaii, enjoying the tropical paradise paid for by my house and my memories. The next few days turned into a tense wait. Carol worked on preparing the paperwork, contacting the court, the bank, the recorder's office. Perkins took on the role of liaison, visiting me daily to update me on progress. "We got a copy of the power of attorney," he reported on the third day, "and we have good news. It explicitly states that the power of attorney covers making medical decisions and managing financial accounts in the event of the principal's incapacity. No mention of the power to sell real estate. So Noel overstepped his authority? I felt oddly relieved. Despite the pain of betrayal, I wanted to believe my son had acted out of ignorance, not intent. "Definitely," Perkins confirmed. "Carol says we're in a very strong position, especially since you've never been declared incompetent. Temporary disability due to injuries is a different matter." I nodded, mentally already working out the next steps. My professional experience as a tax consultant included knowledge of many legal aspects related to finances and property. "We need to see if there were any fictitious documents about my incapacity," I said. "If Noel provided the buyers and the notary with some fake medical reports." "Carol's already on it," Perkins assured me. Already she had requested all the documents from the notary's office that had certified the deal. I leaned back against the pillows, feeling the fatigue weighing me down. Fighting for justice took a lot of energy, which was already running out after the accident. "You know," I said, looking out the window at the setting sun, "sometimes I wonder if it's worth it. Maybe it's easier to let go of the house, to start a new life somewhere." Perkins looked at me carefully. "It's not about the house, is it?" he asked quietly. "It's about betrayal." I nodded slowly. He'd always been able to read me like an open book. I couldn't just let him think that this behavior was acceptable, that it's okay to sell someone else's house, take the money, and go on vacation with no responsibility. "Then we keep fighting," Perkins said firmly. "And we will win, Eugene. You have the stubbornest temper of any man I know, and the sharpest mind when it comes to legal loopholes." I smiled weakly. remembering how Perkins and I had worked on particularly complicated tax cases. We were called IRS terriers. We never let a case go if we sensed a violation. "Thank you, Perk," I said sincerely. "I don't know what I'd do without you." He waved it off, clearly embarrassed by the show of gratitude. "You'd have done fine. You always do." But we both knew this time was different. It wasn't just the legal side of things, but the emotional side as well. I needed the support of a friend to get me through my son's betrayal. That evening, Emily's nurse brought me printouts from the internet, pictures of a luxury cruise ship bound for Hawaii. "My brother works for a travel company," she explained. "He said there's a Hawaiian paradise cruise going on right now, a 2-week trip visiting 4 islands. The cost per couple is about $15,000 if you take a cabin with an ocean view." I looked at the pictures: a snow-white liner, swimming pools, restaurants, entertainment programs. $15,000. About 10% of the amount Noelle and Valerie had taken for themselves. Where did the rest of the money go? "Thank you," I said to Emily. "That's useful information." After she left, I called Carol and shared that information with her. She promised to check to see if there had been any other large expenditures from Noel in Valerie's joint account. If they had spent a significant amount of money, it would make it difficult to recover, she warned. But we could still claim the refund. I agreed, feeling the resolve building inside. It wasn't so much about the house or the money anymore, but about the principle. I wouldn't let Noel think that I could betray the people closest to me with impunity. The next day, the doctors told me that my condition had improved enough that I could be discharged in a few days. That was good news, but it brought a new problem. Where would I go? The house was sold, and renting an apartment in my condition would be difficult. "You're staying with me," Perkins said in a tone that didn't tolerate objection when I shared the dilemma with him. "I have 4 bedrooms and only 1 occupant, plus the first floor, so you won't have to climb the stairs with your leg." I started to object, but he raised his hand, stopping me. "Don't even try to argue, Eugene. It's a settled matter." I was touched by his offer, but I was still uncomfortable with the idea of having to rely on someone else for help. "It's temporary," I said, "just until we get the house sorted out." "Sure," Perkins agreed. "In the meantime, you can help me with the crossword puzzles. You were always better at them." I smiled, grateful for his attempt to preserve my dignity. With Perkins, I could feel useful, not just a burden. When he left, I went back to studying the documents Carol had managed to gather. Slowly but surely, a picture was forming of how Noel had pulled this deal off. He had indeed overstepped his authority under the power of attorney, but he had done it in a way that made it look legal at first glance. In the paperwork submitted to the notary was a copy of a medical certificate of my condition after the accident, which indicated temporary incapacity, a term that could be interpreted in many different ways. Using my experience as a tax consultant, I began to identify other irregularities in the deal's execution. There was no independent appraisal of the value of the house. There was no document showing that the sale was for my benefit. The money was split so that a significant portion went into the trustee's account rather than entirely into my account as it should have been. All of this strengthened our legal position, but it didn't answer the main question that plagued me day and night. Why? Why did Noel do this to me? Had years of strained relationship, my high expectations and criticism, led to such a deep resentment that he decided to take revenge in this way? Or was it Valerie's influence? I had never hidden my opinion of her. I thought she was shallow and calculating. Perhaps she'd encouraged Noel to take such action, convincing him that I didn't deserve loyalty. Whatever the reasons, the result was the same. My only son had betrayed me, taking advantage of my helplessness. And as I thought about it, I felt not only pain, but a growing resolve. I'm not going to let them get away with this. When they got back from Hawaii, they were in for a nasty surprise. The day I was discharged from the hospital came sooner than I expected. Dr. Parker entered the room with a cheerful smile, holding my medical records. "Mr. Quincy, this is goodbye," he announced. "Your recovery is going even better than we predicted. Your ribs are healing well, the concussion is no longer bothering you, and with your leg—" He looked at my plastered right leg, he said. "It's going to take a little longer." "How long?" I asked, mentally preparing for the answer. 5 to 6 more weeks in the cast, then rehabilitation." The doctor handed me the prescriptions and instructions. "Emily will explain your medication regimen and tell you about future visits." Do you have someone to help you at home? Relatives? I felt bitter at the word relatives, but kept my expression neutral. A friend kindly offered his help. He's coming to pick me up soon. The doctor nodded, apparently picking up on my reluctance to discuss the family situation. That's fine. Don't forget the follow-up exam in 2 weeks. And remember, no sudden movements, no heavy lifting, no excessive exertion. After he left, Emily helped me pack my things. The 2 weeks in the hospital hadn't amounted to much. The books Perkins had brought, toiletries, a couple changes of clothes. My phone beeped, a message from Perkins saying he was already in the parking lot. "I'm going to miss you, Mr. Quincy," Emily said as the orderly brought in a wheelchair to transport me. "You were one of the nicest patients I've ever had." "I'm afraid your coworkers would disagree," I smiled weakly, remembering how I'd snapped at the other nurses in the first few days after the accident. "You were just upset." She helped me into the chair. "Sure, and you had every right to be. It's not every day you get in a car accident and," she stammered, apparently remembering the situation with my house. "And you don't have a house," I finished for her. "Thank you, Emily, for everything." She nodded, and I noticed the tears glistening in her eyes. It was strange how sincere human bonds could form in a short time. Perkins was waiting at the main entrance, leaning on his cane, a tribute to the arthritis he'd developed in recent years. When he saw me in my wheelchair, he grinned. "Nice pair of cripples," he grumbled. But his eyes were relieved that I was feeling better. The orderly helped me into Perkins' car, an old but immaculately maintained Cadillac. "So here we are, two veterans of the IRS," Perkins said as we pulled out of the hospital parking lot. "Only I hadn't planned for it to be under these circumstances." I nodded, looking out the window. The city looked the same as it had 2 weeks ago, but something was subtly different. Perhaps it was myself. Perkins lived in a spacious one-story house in a quiet neighborhood, only 20 minutes away from my former home. When he pulled up, he helped me out of the car, and leaning on the crutches I'd thoughtfully brought with me, I walked slowly toward the entrance. "Take your time," he said as he opened the door. "We have all day to make you comfortable." Perkins' house reflected his personality: practical, somewhat old-fashioned, but cozy. Heavy wooden furniture, bookshelves crammed with taxation and detective books, a collection of old jazz records. Everything spoke of a man who valued stability and tradition. "I've prepared a guest bedroom for you," Perkins said as he led me down the hall. "It has everything you need, including a private bathroom. And I've installed handrails to make it easier for you to get around." I was touched by his concern. "Thank you, Perk. I don't know how I'm going to repay you for all this." "Isherm, just get well," he said with a wave of his hand. "And remember, my house is your house for as long as it takes." As I settled into the guest bedroom, Perkins brought us tea and homemade cookies, which, as it turned out, his neighbor, Mrs. Finnegan, had baked when she heard about my situation. "Half the neighborhood already knows your story," Perkins said, settling into the chair across from me. "You're a local celebrity now." "That's great," I grimaced. I'd always wanted to be famous as the old man who'd been robbed by his own son. Perkins looked at me carefully. "Are you ready to talk about it? About Noel? About what led up to all of this?" I sighed. This conversation was going to happen sooner or later. "I don't know where to start," I admitted. "Noel and I had always been different. I was a demanding father, maybe too demanding. I wanted him to do better than I did. And he always resisted my pressure." "I remember," Perkins nodded. "When he dropped out of college, you were furious. Came to my house in the middle of the night, emptied a bottle of my best whiskey, and ranted about the ingratitude of today's youth." I smiled weakly, remembering that night. "Irma called you then, looking for me." "Yeah, and she said if you didn't come home, she'd personally throw all your stuff out on the street." Perkins chuckled. "Huh. She was the only one who could put you in your place." The mention of Irma brought a familiar dull ache to my chest. I often wondered how she would have handled the situation. Probably better than I had. "She was always defending Noel," I said quietly. "Said I was pushing him too hard. That not everyone was born for a career. That happiness could be found in the simple things." "She was a wise woman," Perkins nodded. "But you weren't wrong to want a better future for your son." I shook my head. "I'm not so sure now. Maybe if I'd listened to her more, if I hadn't been so stubborn." maybe our relationship with Noel wouldn't have deteriorated so badly. Perkins sipped his tea, staring thoughtfully out the window. When did Valerie show up? When things got really bad? I grinned wryly. 5 years ago, Noel was 30, and I just about resigned myself to the fact that he'd never marry. And then he brought her to a family dinner, beautiful, confident, 10 years younger than he was. Said they met at a fitness center where she worked as a receptionist. And you immediately disliked her? Perkins asked shrewdly. Not right away, I tried to be honest. At first I was glad Noel had finally found someone. Irma was gone by then, and I felt lonely. I hoped Valerie would inspire him, maybe even push him to do something more. Shianarin. But that didn't happen. No. It soon became clear that I was choosing my words, not wanting to sound prejudiced. She had plans for him. And those plans didn't include getting close to his old man father. She wanted a nice life, traveling, expensive things. And for some reason, she thought I was in the way of that. Perkins frowned. Did she think you were hiding money? Or that you were spending Noel's inheritance? Something like that, I sighed. She kept insinuating that a man in my position, a former tax consultant with 30 years of experience, should have amassed a considerable fortune, and that I was being selfish by hoarding it instead of supporting my son's endeavors. What endeavors? Perkins raised an eyebrow skeptically. As far as I could remember, Noel had never had much ambition. Exactly. But Valerie wanted him to start his own business, some kind of organic food delivery or something. Asked me for startup money, and you said no? Of course, I shrugged. I was willing to help if I saw serious intentions and a solid business plan. But all they presented were a few enthusiastic phrases about a growing market and a unique business model. A typical scheme that would burn through in 3 months. Perkins nodded, fully understanding my position. As former tax consultants, we've seen a lot of failed business ideas. And this was the beginning of the end? Yes. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the fatigue coming on again. Valerie thought I was deliberately preventing them from developing. Started turning Noel against me. And he's always been susceptible to manipulation, especially from women. Inherited that trait from me, I grinned wryly. Irma didn't manipulate you, Perkins objected. No, I agreed. But she knew how to get her way without confrontation. And Noel had adopted that pattern avoiding conflict, but doing things his way. Only he'd never been as whole person like Irma. We were silent for a moment, each absorbed in his own thoughts. I thought back over the last few years, how Noel had grown progressively more distant, how our conversations had become more and more formal, how Valerie was more and more likely to answer for him if I called. You know what the weirdest thing is? I finally said. I'd actually saved up a decent amount of money. Not a fortune, but enough to get Noel off to a good start if he decided to get serious. But I'd expected initiative on his part, a real interest, not just a desire for money. And now they got that money by selling your house. Perkins shook his head. Ironic. Bitter irony, I agreed. But now I had to figure out what to do next. Perkins straightened up, ready to discuss practical matters. Carol says that, legally, we're in a strong position. The deal can be invalidated, the money returned, the house is more complicated, but it's also possible to get it back. I thought about it, looking at my plastered leg. You know, I'm not sure I want to go back to that house. Too many memories, and now they'll be poisoned by this betrayal. Then what do you want? That's a good question. What did I really want? Revenge? No, I wasn't that petty. Justice? Maybe. But most of all, I wanted Noel to realize what he'd done. Not just a legal violation, but a deep personal betrayal. I want them to realize that you can't do that to people, I said slowly. Not just to me, to anyone. You can't betray trust and think you can get away with it. Perkins nodded, echoing my sentiments. And how do you plan to accomplish that? I began to formulate the plan that had been brewing in my head for the last few days. First, we continue the legal work. Carol's filing a nullity suit. Second, we freeze the money in Noel and Valerie's accounts. Only the money from the sale of the house. What about the buyers, the Turners? I sighed. That was the question that bothered me the most. They're the unwitting victims in this situation. I don't want them to get hurt. If the deal's invalidated, they'll get their money back. But if they've already moved in, started renovations, we could offer them a compromise, Perkins suggested. Maybe sell them the house officially at market value. That way, they'd have the house they wanted and you'd get fair compensation. That idea seemed reasonable to me. Yeah, it could work, but first we have to freeze the money in Noel's accounts. Otherwise, by the time they get back from Hawaii, there'll be nothing left. Carol's already filed a petition with the court, Perkins said. Now we had to wait for a decision. I nodded, feeling strangely relieved that the process had begun. We weren't just discussing the situation anymore. We were taking concrete steps. There's something else. I paused. I want to talk to Boyd Tate. Perkins raised his eyebrows in surprise. Our old colleague from the legal department, is he still working? Yeah, in private practice. We've kept in touch over the years. He specializes in trusts and powers of attorney. I think his advice would be helpful. Good idea, Perkins agreed. The more experts we have on our side, the better. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Boyd's number. After a brief exchange of greetings, I briefly explained the situation. Boyd listened in silence, only occasionally asking clarifying questions. This is a serious breach of trust, he said finally. Your son hadn't just overstepped his authority under the power of attorney. He'd used it for his own benefit, in direct contravention of the law. A trustee is obliged to act solely in the interests of the principal. What is your advice? I asked. You have two ways, Boyd replied. A civil suit, which your attorney is already preparing, and potentially a criminal fraud case. The second path is more drastic and could have serious consequences for your son. I closed my eyes, trying to deal with the wave of emotion. A criminal case? No, I couldn't go that far. I don't want to file a criminal complaint, I said firmly. Despite everything he's done, he's still my son. I understand. Boyd sounded relieved. Then let's focus on the civil suit. I can serve as an expert witness if you need me to. And Eugene, he paused. I'm sorry you're going through this. After the call, Perkins brought more tea and sandwiches, a domestic concern that reminded me of the times with Irma. So, he said as we started our late lunch, the plan is to freeze the money, file a nullity suit, negotiate with the Turners. What else? I thought about it, running through all the possible scenarios in my head. We need to be prepared for Noel and Valerie to come back sooner than we expect. If they find out about the account freeze, they might try to counteract it. You think they're capable of anything else? Perkins looked worried. I don't know, I answered honestly. I thought I knew my son, but now... I shrugged. Either way, it's best to be prepared for anything. Perkins nodded, agreeing with my caution. Speaking of preparedness, he said, standing up, I've got something for you. He left the room and returned with a small box. What is it? I asked, accepting it. Open it. Perkins smiled. Inside was a new smartphone, the latest model. I know you're used to your old phone, Perkins said, seeing my surprise. But we need a reliable connection. This one has an extended battery and special security features. And I've already installed all the necessary applications, banking, messengers, even a program to record conversations. Just in case Noel or Valerie called and said something important. I was touched by the thoughtfulness. Thank you, Perk. It means a lot. He waved his hand, embarrassed as usual by the show of gratitude. It's nothing. By the way, I also contacted our old buddy Harrison at the bank. He'll check to see if Noel or Valerie have tried to access your other accounts or investments. Sebronahat, they don't have that authority, I pointed out. The power of attorney was limited. Now we know that the restrictions didn't stop them in the case of the house. Perkins objected reasonably. Better to be reassured. He was right, and the thought was causing a new wave of anxiety. If Noel could get around the power of attorney restrictions once, what was to stop him from trying again? Fortunately, most of my savings were in the form of investments, and access to them was protected by additional security measures. By late afternoon, I was feeling very tired from the excitement of the last few days and the unusual activity after the hospital. Perkins noticed this and helped me get settled in for the night. Get some rest, he said, turning on the nightlight. We have a lot to do tomorrow. Carol promised to come with news of the court decision. Alone, I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling and thinking about how strange life had turned out. Instead of a peaceful old age next to my beloved wife, I found myself in someone else's house, fighting for justice against my own son. But even in this bitter situation, there was a ray of light, the support of friends who did not leave me in a difficult moment. Perkins, Carol, Boyd, even Emily the nurse. They all showed that human kindness exists even when those closest to you betray. With that comforting thought, I finally drifted off to sleep, feeling for the first time in days that I was not alone in my struggle. Waking up in the morning at Perkins' house, I was surprised to find that I felt better than I had in days. The physical pain was receding, although the leg in the bulky cast was still uncomfortable. But most importantly, there was a sense of control, replacing the helplessness that had plagued me in the hospital. After breakfast, prepared by the caring Perkins, Carol, who had arrived early that morning, and I sat in the living room to discuss the next steps. The news was encouraging. The judge had issued a preliminary order freezing the accounts, Carol said, laying the documents on the table. All funds received from the sale of the house are now inaccessible until the final judgment. How quickly would that work? I asked, realizing that time was of the essence. The banks have already been notified, Carol replied. The accounts should be frozen by noon. I glanced at my watch. It was 11 in the morning. If Noelle and Valerie hadn't checked their accounts yet, they were in for a nasty surprise. What about the date for the preliminary hearing? Perkins asked, handing us coffee. In 2 weeks, Carol took a sip. Excellent coffee, Mr. Holt. My late wife's secret recipe, Perkins smiled. 2 weeks is good, Eugene. Enough time to gather all the evidence and prepare properly. I nodded, wondering what would happen when Noelle and Valerie returned. According to my calculations, their cruise would be over in 4 days. By then, they'd know for sure about the freeze in the lawsuit. I suggest we be proactive, I said, setting my cup aside. Send them an official letter notifying them of the lawsuit so they can't say they didn't know. That makes sense, Carol agreed. I'll have the documents ready today. Where should I send them? Do you have their home address? Yeah, in the South Chula Vista neighborhood. An apartment they've been renting for 3 years, I dictated. But it might be a good idea to send a copy to email, too. That way they'll get the notice even though they're on a cruise. Good idea, Carol wrote down Noel's email address. The afternoon was spent preparing documents and discussing strategy. By evening, we had sent the official notification, both electronically and by regular mail. Now all that was left was to wait for a response. The response came faster than I expected. At about 9 p.m., my new phone rang. Noel's name popped up on the screen. I showed the phone to Perkins, and he nodded, turning on the call recording app. Yeah, question mark, I answered in a neutral tone. Dad, Noel's voice sounded tense, with a hint of panic in it. What's going on? We just got some letter from a lawyer, and our accounts are locked up. What do you think is going on? I tried to speak calmly, though my heart was pounding with excitement. It's a misunderstanding, he said quickly. I was acting in your best interest. The house was too big for you alone, especially after the accident. I just wanted to sell my house without my consent, take most of the money, and fly to Hawaii, I interrupted him. Is that how you acted in my best interest? Silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard a woman's voice, muffled but insistent. Valerie was obviously nearby, saying something to Noel. We can talk when we get back, he finally said. Explain everything in person. I'm sure we can resolve this misunderstanding without lawyers and courts. There is no misunderstanding, Noel, I said firmly. You broke the law. You misused the power of attorney. You sold the house at an undervalued price, and you transferred a substantial amount of money into your personal account. This is all subject to legal action. Silence again, then a rustle. Valerie must have picked up the phone. Eugene. Her voice sounded honeyed, but with a hint of irritation. Let's not make a big deal out of this. Yes, we may not have acted in a completely conventional way, but it was for your own good. You need money for treatment, and the house needs constant upkeep. We just solved those problems in one fell swoop. And at the same time, we decided to spend $150,000 on a cruise, I said sarcastically. What? She raised her voice. A cruise costs $15,000, no more. And where did the rest of the money go, Valerie? I asked. $135,000? There was another rustle, muffled voices. They were obviously arguing. Then Noel spoke again. Dad, let's not discuss this over the phone. We'll be back in 4 days and we'll explain everything. And this money, it's not spent, just set aside for investment. You've always said we should invest. In that case, you'll be explaining not only to me, but to the judge, I remained adamant. The preliminary hearing is scheduled 2 weeks after your return. Are you seriously suing us? Noel's voice shook. Against your own son? I felt something inside me clench. Despite the betrayal, he was still my child, the boy I'd once taught to ride a bike. Did you leave me a choice? I asked quietly. When you sold my house behind my back? I thought you'd be grateful, Noel suddenly blurted out. All my life you've said that I wasn't good at making decisions, that I wasn't proactive enough. And when I finally did something decisive, I couldn't believe my ears. You call betrayal decisive? There was another exchange on the other end of the line. Then Valerie's voice, now without any pretense of softness. Look, Eugene, we're all adults. Let's just agree like civilized people. What do you want? The money? We'll get it back, even though it's a big blow to our plans. It's not just about money, Valerie, I said. It's about trust. It's about respect. Basic decency. You can't put a price on any of that. Oh, God, she said irritably. Don't start with the moralizing. You're always doing that, looking down on us like we're some unreasonable children. Noel's been trying to prove to you for years that he's worthy of respect, but you won't see it. I could hear Noel trying to calm her down, but Valerie was on fire. How many times do you have to put up with this? She continued. We live in a tiny rented apartment while you alone occupy a huge house. Noel's working a job she hates, and you keep talking about making the right choice. And when we pitch you a business idea, you look at us like we're idiots when you haven't even bothered to look at the details. Valerie, that's enough, Noel finally intervened, and I heard him take the phone away from her. Dad, I'm sorry. This has gone too far. Let's meet when we get back. No lawyers, just you and me. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. Valerie's outburst had revealed the depth of resentment and jealousy they both obviously felt for me. Was I really such a callous father? Had I really been so ignorant of my son's needs and desires? I don't think a face-to-face meeting will change anything, Noel, I finally replied. The case is already in court. The accounts have been frozen. If you have anything to say it through your lawyer. Lawyer? His voice sounded lost. We don't have a lawyer, and we don't have the money for one now either. I almost gave in to pity, but then I remembered his message. Your house is sold? Bye. Such callous negligence did not deserve compassion. The court will appoint a public defender for you if you can't afford a private one, I said dryly. That'll be all. Wait, Noel sounded desperate. Dad, I didn't mean for this to happen. I thought I was doing what was best. What's best for who, Noel? For me or for you? I didn't wait for an answer and ended the call. Perkins turned off the tape and looked at me sympathetically. Are you okay? I nodded, though inside I was seething with conflicting emotions. They both don't realize what they've done, I said. Valerie thinks I'm an arrogant old man who's interfering with their happiness. And Noel, I shook my head. He justifies his betrayal by saying he was trying to take the initiative I'd always expected of him. Perverse logic, Perkins grumbled. But, in a way I understand them. I don't condone it, but I understand the motivation. They feel like failures around you. So instead of working on themselves, they decided to cut corners, to take what they thought you should have given them. I pondered his words. Perhaps Perkins was right. All my life I'd tried to instill in Noel responsibility, hard work, honesty, the qualities I valued above all else. But perhaps my methods were too harsh. Maybe instead of inspiring him, I was only making him feel inferior. Whatever happened in the past doesn't excuse their actions now, Perkins said firmly, as if reading my mind. We all make parenting mistakes, but children grow up and are responsible for their choices. I was grateful for that encouragement. Perkins always knew how to find the right words. The next few days passed in anticipation. Noel tried several more times to call, but I didn't answer. We learned through Carol that he had also contacted the court, trying to overturn the decision to freeze the accounts, but to no avail. The law was on our side. Finally, the day came for their return. I knew this because Carol had set up surveillance of their apartment. Legal, through a private investigator who simply recorded comings and goings. Around 3 in the afternoon, the message came. Noel and Valerie had come home with their suitcases. "What now?" Perkins asked when we got the news. "Now we wait," I replied. "They have received official notification. They know about the freezing of accounts. The next step is up to them." We didn't have to wait long. An hour later, my phone rang again, this time from an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Quincy?" A man's voice sounded when I answered. "My name is Warren Jameson. I'm your son, Noel Quincy's lawyer. He asked me to contact you about a situation." I glanced over at Perkins. So Noel had found the money for a lawyer after all. "I'm listening," I said. "My client would like to settle this matter amicably, without a trial," Jameson continued. "He's willing to return all the proceeds from the sale of the house and formally apologize for the misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. "Mr. Jameson, your client illegally sold my house by misusing the power of attorney. That's not a misunderstanding. That's fraud. Mr. Quincy," the lawyer's voice became more formal, "let me point out that the power of attorney had some ambiguous language. My client interpreted it as authorizing you to act on your behalf in a situation where you couldn't make decisions for yourself." "I was perfectly capable of making decisions," I countered. "A broken leg doesn't affect mental capacity, Mr. Jameson. And if your client thought otherwise, he should have gotten a medical opinion, not forged documents for a notary." Silence on the other end of the line. Apparently, the lawyer didn't know about the forged documents. "Mr. Quincy," he finally said, "let's not aggravate the situation with mutual accusations. My client admits that he acted impulsively, but he's willing to make amends. The question is, what do you want?" "That's a good question. What did I really want? The house back? The money? Or something more important than an admission of guilt? A realization of betrayal?" "I want justice, Mr. Jameson," I answered. "Your client broke the law and betrayed my trust. Let the court decide what punishment is appropriate for those actions. With all due respect, Mr. Quincy," I said, a hint of irritation in my lawyer's voice, "a trial will take a lot of time and effort, and not just for my client, but for you as well. Are you sure you're ready for that in your condition?" Typical scare tactics. I've worked with lawyers too long to fall for that. "My condition allows me to assert my rights," I replied dryly. "And I have a great lawyer. Tell your client I expect him in court in 2 weeks." After the call ended, I leaned back in my chair, feeling strangely relieved. For the first time in a long time, I was acting decisively, not giving in to manipulation or compromise when it came to matters of principle. "Well played," Perkins nodded approvingly. "Now was watching that Jameson was obviously trying to get a feel for how serious you were. Now they'd be thinking about a real solution to the problem, not a formal apology." I hoped he was right. More than anything, I wanted Noel to realize the seriousness of what he'd done. Not just to return the money, but to realize that he had violated something fundamental, the trust between father and son. By late afternoon, the detective reported a violent scene outside Noel and Valerie's apartment. Valerie left with a suitcase, yelling something about not being able to solve even such a simple problem. Noel was left alone, looking depressed and lost. I couldn't help but feel a prick of regret. Noel and I may have had a far from perfect relationship, but I had never wished to destroy his family. "Don't take responsibility for their problems," Perkins said when I shared these thoughts with him. "If their marriage doesn't survive the first major challenge, then it was flawed to begin with." Perhaps he was right. Still, I couldn't escape the thought that if I had been a more attentive father, more open to my son's needs, maybe none of this would have happened. Late that night, after Perkins had already gone to bed, I got a text from Noel. "Dad, please, let's talk. Just you and me. I'll explain everything. Valerie's gone. I'm alone." I stared at that message for a long time, not knowing how to react. Part of me wanted to call my son immediately, to find out what had happened, to try to patch things up. But the other, more rational part reminded me of the betrayal, of the rash act, of how easily he'd succumbed to Valerie's influence. In the end, I decided not to answer. At least not yet. I needed time to gather my thoughts, to decide what I really wanted to say to my son, and maybe he needed time too. Time to truly realize the consequences of his actions. I turned off my phone and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Too many thoughts were swirling in my head about the past, about the present, about what would happen next, about how Noel and I had gotten to the point where betrayal was possible, and whether or not there was a way back, a way, if not to repair the relationship, at least to build a new one based on mutual respect and honesty. The morning before the preliminary hearing was surprisingly clear. I looked out the window of Perkins' house at the cloudless sky and thought about my upcoming meeting with my son. In the 2 weeks since they'd returned from Hawaii, Noel had tried to contact me several times, calling, texting, even coming to Perkins' house, but he'd gotten no further than the doorstep. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Perkins asked, watching me as I tried to adjust my tie, balancing on my crutches in front of the mirror. "No," I answered honestly, "but it's necessary. I can't hide forever." After much deliberation, I decided to meet Noel before the hearing, not in the courtroom, where everything would be official and cold, but on neutral territory, in the apartment he was renting, to be exact. Valerie, the detective reported, still hadn't returned, though they'd kept in touch. Perkins insisted I not go alone. "I'll wait in the car," he said, "just in case." I didn't object, realizing that his concern was justified. It wasn't that I was afraid of Noel, he'd never been violent, but the situation was tense, and a friend's support was reassuring. The drive to Noel's apartment took about 20 minutes. I rehearsed the conversation in my head, but I realized that the reality of the situation was likely to take a very different turn. When we pulled up to the unassuming apartment building where my son was renting, I felt my heart start to beat faster. Perkins helped me out of the car and handed me my crutches. "I'll be here," he said. "Call me if anything goes wrong." I nodded, grateful for his support, and slowly made my way toward the driveway. Getting up to the third floor with crutches was a challenge, but I made it, pausing at each landing. Finally, I found myself in front of the door with the number 307. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the bell. The door opened almost instantly, as if Noel was standing right behind it, waiting. He looked gaunt and aged, the circles under his eyes, the wrinkled shirt, the sloppily combed hair. Not the carefree vacationer he was supposed to be back from Hawaii. "Dad," he breathed out, clearly surprised to see me. You're here. Can I come in?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Yes, of course." He stepped aside, letting me in. "Careful, there's a threshold." The apartment was small but neat. The living room was connected to the kitchen, minimal furniture, a few pictures on the walls, mostly landscapes, no family photos. I noted the stack of boxes in the corner. It looked like Noel was moving, or at least getting ready to move. "Have a seat," he said, pointing to the couch. "Do you want anything? Tea? Coffee?" "No, thanks." I sank down onto the couch, putting my crutches next to me. "I've come to talk, Noel." Before the hearing. He nodded, taking a seat in the chair across from me. His hands nervously rubbed the edge of his t-shirt, a habit from childhood that came out when he was tense or feeling guilty. "Did Valerie leave?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Yeah," he sighed. "Said she couldn't be with a man who couldn't stand up for himself. That I should have solved the problem with you instead of letting our accounts freeze. And how did she think you were supposed to fix the problem?" I couldn't contain my sarcasm. "I don't know," Noel shrugged. "Probably convince you to drop the lawsuit," or he trailed off, or find another way to get the money. I looked at my son carefully, trying to figure out what was going on in his head. "Noel, why did you do this? Why didn't you just come to me if you needed the money?" He looked up at me, and I saw a mixture of shame and resentment in his eyes. "You wouldn't have given it," he said simply. "You never approved of our plans. You thought we were petty, unworthy of your attention." "I never thought you were unworthy," I countered. "I just wanted you to strive for more, not to squander your potential on—" "See?" he interrupted bitterly. "Even now you can't help but judge. Always that tone of superiority, always that I know better. You know what the most frustrating thing is, Dad? That I'm still trying to live up to your expectations. Still seeking your approval, even though I'm 35 and I should have outgrown that a long time ago. His words hit me deeper than I expected. Was I really that kind of father? The one whose approval had to be earned, not the one who supported unconditionally? If you felt that way, why didn't you ever talk about it? I asked. Would you have listened? He grinned unhappily. Every time I tried to explain that I wanted to go my own way, you took it as laziness or lack of ambition. When I dropped out of college, you didn't talk to me for a week. When I got a job as a courier, you said I was burning through my potential. Even when I married Valerie, I never criticized your choice of wife, I objected. Not with words, Noel agreed, but your eyes spoke for you. You looked at her as a misunderstanding, as a mistake I'd made. I wanted to object, but I knew there was some truth in what he was saying. I really had never hidden my disappointment with Noel's choice, both in my career and in my personal life. At that moment, the apartment door opened, and Valerie appeared on the doorstep. She froze when she saw me, then entered with determination, dropping her bag on the floor. What a nice meeting, she said with obvious sarcasm. Family reunion? Valerie, Noel stood up, looking suddenly tense. Dash, I didn't know you were coming. Obviously, she gave him a cold look, then turned to me. Well, Eugene, you've made your point. Accounts frozen, Noel's reputation damaged, our plans ruined. Happy? I met her gaze calmly. Valerie, you stole my house and my money. Be thankful I didn't file a criminal complaint. Stole? She snorted. We relieved you of the burden of maintaining a huge house that you are unable to maintain at your age and with your injuries. We acted in your best interest. Was the cruise to Hawaii in my best interest too? I couldn't contain my sarcasm. Her face flushed slightly, but she quickly pulled herself together. 15,000 was a drop in the bucket compared to the total amount. We planned to invest the rest, to create a business that would make a profit for you too. Even if I believed that, I said, you had no right to make those decisions behind my back. Because you would never approve them, she countered. You always thought we weren't smart enough, not ambitious enough. Organic food? That's a fashion fad, she mocked my voice. And now it's a billion-dollar industry. But no, the great tax consultant Eugene Quincy knows better. I looked at Noel, expecting him to intervene, but he stood silently, eyes downcast, letting Valerie speak for both of them, as apparently always happened. Perhaps I was too critical, I admitted, turning to both of them. But that doesn't excuse cheating and stealing, and that's enough to know that we're not on the same path. What does that mean, Noel asked, worried for the first time in the whole conversation. It means that our relationship is over, I said firmly. I'm taking my house through the courts. The money is going back to the rightful owners, and you and I, Noel, will no longer be a part of each other's lives. You're, giving up on me? His voice trembled, and for a moment I saw in him the little boy I'd once taught to ride a bike. No, Noel, I shook my head. You gave up on me when you decided to sell my house behind my back, when you chose money and a cruise over honesty and respect. Some things can't be undone with an apology. But we can try, he sounded desperate. I'll get the money back, every dime of it. We can start over. No, I was adamant. Trust is broken, and I'm too old to spend my remaining years trying to rebuild it. Better to make a clean break. Valerie looked at us with undisguised satisfaction. I told you, Noel, she said. Your father will never forgive. He'd rather give up his own son than admit that he too might have been wrong. I admit my mistakes, I objected. I was too demanding a father, too stingy with praise, too fixated on my idea of success. But that doesn't excuse betrayal. So what now? Noel asked. Just, the end. Yes. I stood up, leaning on my crutches. We'll meet in court, finalize the formalities with the house and the money, and then we'll go our separate ways. I'm going to move, start a new chapter of my life. I suggest you do the same. Valerie went to the stack of boxes in the corner and started going through them. I've already started, she said coldly. I've come to get the rest of my things. I'll leave the keys to the apartment on the table. You can keep paying rent if you want, but I'm moving out. Valerie, Noel took a step toward her, but she stopped him with a gesture. Don't, Noel. We've already talked about this. I gave you a chance to work out the house and the money. You couldn't. I don't want to be a part of this mess. I watched this scene with mixed feelings. On the one hand, I couldn't help but feel some satisfaction that Valerie, who I felt was a negative influence on my son, was leaving his life. On the other hand, it pained me to see Noel's family fall apart, even if it wasn't a perfect family. As for the trial, I said, breaking the awkward silence, I'm willing to compromise. Both of them turned to me in surprise. What kind of compromise? Noel asked. I won't press for criminal prosecution, I said, and I'm not even willing to insist on getting the house back if we can negotiate a market value settlement with the Turners. But the money you took for yourself must be returned. Every dime of it. But we don't have that money, Valerie exclaimed. I mean, we have it, but it's in a frozen account. When the court declares the deal invalid, the accounts will be unfrozen, I explained, and you will transfer this money back to me or directly to the Turners if we agree to keep the deal. And if we don't? Valerie asked defiantly. Then there will be a full-blown lawsuit, I replied firmly, with possible criminal consequences. With those words, I headed for the exit. At the door, I turned around one last time. Goodbye, Noel, I said quietly. I hope you find what you're looking for, but it will be without me. I walked out, closing the door behind me, and slowly started down the stairs. Each step was difficult, not only because of the crutches, but also because of the weight on my heart. I had just severed the last connection to the family I had once had. Now I was truly alone. But along with the pain came a strange relief. No more pretending, no more hoping to improve a relationship that had been poisoned by years of misunderstanding and now betrayal. I could finally let go of the past and focus on the future, whatever it might be. Perkins was waiting in the car as promised. When he saw the look on my face, he didn't ask any questions, just helped me into the seat and started the engine. Home? He asked. Yes, I answered. But not for long. It's time to find a new place to live, a new home, a new beginning. He nodded understandingly, and we moved on. I didn't look back at the windows of Noel's apartment. Some roads end, and there was no point in standing at an intersection looking back. It was time to move forward, alone, but with dignity, and perhaps with a new understanding of myself and my place in the world.